afternoon, and thank you for joining us today on Wind Speaker Radio, CFWE, CJWE, on our network across Alberta. I would like to welcome all of those joining us today as well online. I'll be your host for the next hour and a half. Today we are checking in with Indigenous people in Alberta to see how they are dealing with the pandemic and their perspectives on mental wellness. Before we begin today, I would like to state that I am joining today's call and online from the city of Calgary, which is the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy and includes the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai First Nations, the Stoney Nakoda as well, comprising of Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley First Nations, and the Tsuut'ina Nation. This territory is also home to the Métis Nation. Today we have with us as our guests, we have Joanne Packham and Christopher Beausoleil, and Elder Pam Heavyhead. And as we start today's call today, I would like to ask Elder Pam for a prayer, and we are virtually online, and I'd also like to offer you this virtual tobacco.
Mm-hmm.
Prayer.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. So I have already lit my smudge, so I'm sending you a cyber smudge, Loa. So I really want to talk about our prayer today is especially important and entirely for me necessary to pray about this whole issue of opioids and crisis and hopefulness of children, because children should never lose hope and joy. And it's never it never gets old when people say they're the people of the future. Well, they really are. We've arrived at that because at one time we were the people of the future, and what have we brought with us to now? So opioids is a very critical issue in our communities. And I really want to thank the other guests that are online and the people that are listening, because we need to ask for help from our Creator. We're at a very critical time with our children, with our young people, because they are the ones that are most affected by the opioids. And how is it that we ask for help from our Creator to gain strength so that our people will come back home and be the Indigenous people that we say we are, with all good things in our values and our beliefs, in our cultures, our stories, our lives, our songs, and what do we bring to people in the future? I examanto I not go after kana timagina unana notska giskak into tamata gemi witiswa kakamimoa keke te oya nina kweskana gemi witaya kik oskaya kawasak oteni kan wisto gemi upmatsunchik gemi upiknao sochik onigi komao kai katena magosia kai katena maso ako iko maskikia mswe pai chikana ntoa simsnanak no simnanak nitai sininanak no ako magananak iko ka meschikotsik pues kana ke miupuni tayak kikka kamemoa ke sitaskato kawasakutsi ute nikan pues kana wisto ke miupmatsunchik ke miumamtene tamachik ke kayoatistik Kemi osni kopmatsun wow sagi tono skywat soon mi mam tene taman xewat soon mi waskawin keini kaisoyak kakamemoa kasitos kamasoak nto hasimsnanak no simnanak kweskana kemi opmatsi so tsikoteni kan kakeke wasyaik tahkap muhte tsikakena kemi upikinaoso tsikakeke sagi so tsik Kemi upmachi sochik Kueskana kemi upamisutzik. Aektimaginaunaan ksemanto, kueskemi asikanutsin tatoskeunnaan piikskueunnaan. Kueskana kemi uitsajaki koskaajak. Kueskemi uitsihkustik. Kahki on toasimsnaanak. Uitsi miinan toasimsnaanaa töisaakaisim kueskana kemi uitsihsut. Kahka meimut kueskana kemi uitsaat uitaisiinima pikani. Kueskana kemi uitsajaki kahki on toasimsnaanak. Kueskana kemi uitsihkustik kahki on siksikai. Kaina amskapi pikani kueskana kemi uitsihkustik mina kahki on itaisiinimnaanak. Maskuatsiisi knoahkumaakanaanak. Kueskana kemi uitsihkusiaka uasktaskam kniitaisiinimnaanak. Knoahkumaakanaanak kueskana kemi upmaatsisoaak. Kewaseak tahkap muhteak kueskana kemi uppikinaasoaak. Kesuhksuniak kahkamimuak. Ekawikatskipak teemuak maka kueskemi uitsaajaki koskaajak. Uistoa kemi upnitsahakik. Uhkitskivoekak jasunmakoakik kehteiak. Kaiwaatsuun kaagisimuun miupmaatsuun. Miumaamtanehtamaan ksewaatsuun. Miuaskaujun kueskana kemi uppiktsikawassaku teenikaan eksiisn totamaakanutskaakiska.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I understood a little bit of that prayer, and I thank you for that. I really enjoy hearing elders' prayers in the sense of how vast their prayers go out and how many people they're praying for, including the land and the sky and the stars and the moon. Thank you very much. I would like to start as well to thank our partners in today's organizing of today's town hall. We do have our Wind Speaker Media staff across the province that I would like to thank for today, our Indigenous Health Services staff in the preparation for today, and our steering committee members that are from Treaties 6, 7, and 8. When the steering committee began last year, they've chosen pretty important topics, and of any topic, I think today is more important than ever as we're coming to our post-COVID time with a lot of restrictions being lifted and the impacts that are still there. I think it is more vital that we are talking about this topic today. And I would like to welcome our panel members that we have. And I'm going to go to each one of them for introductions on themselves, what their background is in their career, what they've done in their life, maybe what community they're from, some of their Indigenous ancestry, and then we'll get into our questions. I do want to go back to Elder Pam Heavyhead, and then I'll go to Joanne and then Christopher. So Elder Pam, I know you are a registered member of the Blood Tribe. You've married into that nation, and you're originally from Ermineskin, Musqueam. And I will go to you for an introduction of yourself.
All right. Greetings, everyone. Hi. Nanaskomun, I'm grateful that you invited us here to talk about such an important issue. Yes, I am from Musqueam. I remember talking to my brother. I was saying farewell to him. He was going back home, and I was in Cardston. And I said, I don't know when the next time I'll go to Hobima, I said. And he said, I don't know where that is. I just know where Musqueam is. So Musqueam it is. And I think that's a very important thing that we when we were children, the old people, even if they always knew who you were, they always asked you, Awi Nakia, who are you? And it was your job to say, I am, and you would say, I'm Sepiaki, which is my Blackfoot name now. But I would always say who my parents were, who my grandparents were, and the land that I was born into. the land that where I came from. So I came from Musquecheese. My parents were Justine and Smith Littlechild. My Musumin Kukum were Jean and Dan Mind and Alexander and Eugenia Littlechild. So I I'm and whom I unfortunately never got to meet because they had passed away long before I was ever born. Um, at Musquecheese, I left there when I married my husband in 1973, and I left a really anxious time, a really anxious community, because there were so many things that were coming to a head, and the big thing was oil money. And we came in 30 years in a community that was went from rags to riches to rags, and it left behind many, many orphans. And I think Bob Silverthorne at one time had said to me, and this was in 1992, that there were over 200 children that were under age 12 that were totally orphaned. And that was from a lot of the collisions, from the violence, the murder, the suicides, the drugs, and the gangs. And it was a really horrible time. And my heart was kind of being torn apart all the time, seeing from afar what was going on in my hometown. And I come here to the blood reserve. I've been here. Martin and I have been married for 48 years, almost 49 years. And, I see the same things, the same kind of violence going on, and catching up to a lot of these things that were that were really traumatic. A lot of the poverty, the trauma, and the intergenerational impacts of what our life experience has been in terms of our legislated history and our systemic history. And I've worked that long, I think for 40 years, um, both at university and with the World Council of Indigenous Peoples, with the Assembly of First Nations, with also with the Canadian Red Cross. And all the time it's been this thing of of struggle, of the it there's been a lot of turmoil, there's been a lot of sadness, there's been a lot of grief, and all of that is now, I feel, I see, is we are at the max of crisis with opioids, and our work continues. It's harder. It's harder now. And what are we doing in the future about it? And yeah, so that's
Thank
kind
you.
of what I'm thinking about right now in
Thank
terms
you.
of opioids. Mhm.
Can you tell me one thing that I thought might say? Your children, how many children do you have and grandchildren?
I have 4 daughters and 1 son. I have 5 children, and we have 7 grandchildren. We have 5 granddaughters and 2 grandsons,
Oh, wow.
and they are hilarious as all get out. They are love. I know I'm one of those kokums that I think, those bumper stickers. If I'd have had knew that grandchildren were this much fun, I'd have had them first.
Oh,
I
that's
know,
a good one.
I
Thank
know.
you. Thank
Mm,
you very much. I'm going to ask you to come back after we do introductions to talk a little bit about Canada's history. So thank you for that introduction, and I know you've done many things in your life, and I continue to thank you to continue to be there for us. Thanks so much. I will go to Joanne Packham. She is the executive director of Wood Buffalo Wellness Society, in which she manages the Mark Amy Treatment Center. So Joanne, if you can give an introduction to those listening today.
Hello, thank you for having me. Thank you to Elder Pam for the prayer today. So my name is Joanne Packham. I am originally from northern Manitoba, a little community called Winnipegoses. My family, I am Métis, so I have a settler mother, but my Indigenous roots are, my Cookums are Fletts and Richards and Chartrans. So I come from a strong line of proud Métis people. So I've been very blessed in my career. I started out quite young in Winnipeg, working in the inner city. I started my education in child and youth care in 1995, and from there it just sort of spilled into a lot of the Friendship Center movement, a lot of youth work. And I have kind of lived all over Canada and worked primarily in Indigenous service delivery. So I've been working in the field of addiction specifically for the last 17 years. Previous to that, worked in child development and obviously the child and youth care. So I have been the executive director of Wood Buffalo Wellness Society for 10 years now. I had a brief hiatus where I went to a mainstream organization for a brief time and came back home to work again with Wood Buffalo Wellness Society. So I run Mark Amy Treatment Center, and then we have a community services division where we run several Housing First programs. So we work in primarily with an Indigenous population, working with persons who are experiencing homelessness. So at the treatment center, and basically for the whole society as well, our philosophies are very much grounded in ensuring that our staff and we are educating our clients on the intergenerational impacts of colonization. Colonization is not a historical event. It continues to this day. So we do for our ally staff and for our Indigenous staff together, we do a lot of just training and education around that. So I'm here today to speak about the work that we do and what we're experiencing with addictions and mental health impacts, largely post-pandemic, and how that has morphed and changed for us, and what we're experiencing in the communities, and what we're seeing within our programs as well. So hi, thank you again for having me.
Thank you so much. I was in Manitoba last week. It's still very, very cold. It's still cold here.
Very much so.
Thank you. I know you're a busy lady, and I really thank you for joining today's discussion to share some important information with us today. Thanks. I will go to Christopher Beausoleil, and he works at Fort McMurray 468 First Nation. And Christopher, if you could say hello to our listeners and give an introduction of yourself.
Yes, hello everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you, Pam, for leading us in prayer this afternoon. So my name is Chris Beausoleil. I am a 468 First Nation band member, but I'm a returning band member. So I was born and raised in Toronto and spent the majority of my life out that way, and grew up around addictions and had a difficult upbringing, you could say. I made the decision to return to Alberta, to my mom's homeland, to reconnect with family and to start building a new life out here. So originally I was in Edmonton for the past 8-9 years. I worked in the inner city with Boyle Street Community Services and now with Nikinan Housing Ventures for those 7 years. And so most of the work I did was connected through culture. So taking people and connecting people with their identity and giving them out to ceremony. The other part was, trying to encourage and meet people where they're at and help them survive and get to a better place in life. And so seeing firsthand the traumatic effects that this opioid crisis has had, lost so many people that I worked with out there, that the numbers are really staggering. But through that, I gained a lot of experiences and knowledge that I wanted to eventually bring home. And so this past summer, I made the decision to leave Edmonton and move to Fort McMurray to come work for my nation as the Community Wellness Coordinator, which is a newer program that is still in its early years. This is, I think we're a year and a half into it now, and I've been here for just over 6 months. So we're just trying to develop, again, programming and supports for community in community so that we can increase livability for people here and offer those supports if they are facing issues regarding any type of crisis in life, but also with addictions. And I have 2 young daughters. So I have a 2.5-year-old, and then I have a 6-month-old. I was fortunate my wife was kind enough to allow us to move up here and relocate when she was 8.5 months pregnant. And yeah, so being home has been a blessing, and I just want to continue to work with partners in the area to create opportunities for our people. But also, you know, when we have these opportunities to discuss some of these difficult situations that our people face, so that we can try to find alternative answers to support people in a better way. So, hey.
Thank you very much, Christopher. That's an amazing story that you came down from Toronto to go back to your nation. And I commend you for doing that and commend you for wanting to be back part of your community and helping people there. So yeah, thank you again for the work that you do. Yes, at this time, I would like to note that even though today we are speaking on some data regarding addictions and mental health in First Nations communities, specifically to the number of lives that we've lost, I would like to note that behind these lives that we've lost in community, I hope we could all understand that these were our brothers, our sisters, our mothers, our fathers, our grandmothers, grandfathers, aunties, uncles, and cousins who were loved and still are very loved. If we could continue to understand that any life we lose, regardless if it's one or more, that this is a substantial loss for that family and for the community. So I just wanted to note that. I know we'll be doing a lot of talking on different data and different stats and the impacts. At this time, I'd like to go to Elder Pam Heavyhead again. And her and I were speaking earlier, and what I wanted her to convey to our listeners is it's still very surprising to me. And I think especially last year with the discovery that actually went beyond our communities and went to the regular Canadian public, that a lot of the Canadian public still looks at addictions in First Nations communities with First Nations Indigenous people, and they don't necessarily understand what the root causes are. They don't understand some of Canada's histories, some of the systemic laws and policies that existed. And I just wanted to ask Elder Pam, with her experience and a lot of the history that she researches and has done in her life, if she can explain to our listeners, and even those that are younger, because I do know my son would be part of that, he's 20 years old, what are some of those root causes that our people have endured to really show why we're going through the crisis that we're going through today?
I think, you know, I want to begin by saying that, you know, one of our elders was, a couple of our elders said some really important things to us when my husband and I were learning to become members in our religious societies, our sacred groups. And when we were joining ceremony, and we were in our 30s, one of the things that they said, Frank Wsth had told us, was, you know, we're always in the middle of 5 generations because we are part of our parents and our grandparents. Even if we're not with them, we are with people of their age group. And our children and our grandchildren, even if we never have children, our peers will have children, our siblings will have children, and our grandchildren. So the 5 generations of time is our immediate life experience, becomes our immediate memory. One of the things that Adam Delaney, another elder, told us was, you know, when a child knows his history, his culture, his language, his family, his heroes, his food, his stories, his song, and all of these things that belong, that are the birthright of our people, that he will be so strong that he'll not want to die because he will know how beautiful that life is. When you talk about the interruptions of our people in living that good life, you know, in our prayer, we always say that in the future that our children will sit in the same circles of ceremony that we're at, and now we have come to that point. So did we teach our children culture, language, ceremony, songs, stories, food, values, belief systems, all of those things that belong to us? You know, when we talk about Canada's Indian policy, and, you know, we go back to an Indian Act, and, you know, and lands reserved for Indians, those legislations started to sort us out to become a managed people, and a managed people with numbers, treaty numbers, and even later at residential school. You know, you ask anybody over 70 years old today, what was your number at school? They'll tell you, oh, it was 27, and my wife, hers was 34. You know, like, people can still relate to that. And having that fresh in this memory, this lifetime, that experience, you know, it's only Indigenous people in Canada that were sent to residential school. When Charles Ryerson was writing the Education Act, separate schools were for the Irish immigrant children. Public schools were for the wealthy, but private schools, residential schools, industrial schools, mission schools, those were for Indigenous people. So over time, you know, over 250 schools across the country, and 40% of those schools were in Alberta. And you look at, in 1920, the official Canadian Indian policy by Duncan Campbell Scott read that I want to rid of the Indian problem. In order to rid of the Indian problem, um, we cannot continue to support a class of people that are unable to stand alone. And, you know, we will continue until every Indian has been absorbed into the body politic of Canada. There's no Indian question, there's no Indian department. I think that's still, um, not visibly, but systemically. I think that still happens. The whole goal of residential school was to kill the Indian in the child. And if you look at the state, what does genocide really mean? Is to extinguish a people's culture through their children. So if we were, you know, our parents were at residential school, or we were at residential school, when then did the parents have time to influence their children with language, with culture, with knowledge, with tradition, and all of those things that make us whole to be the Indigenous people that we say we are? You know, when did we experience those rites of passage and know that sense of belonging, of who it was that we belonged to? And even setting our expectations in the future, who was going to carry on our ways, who was the one that was going to be able to, you know, just live that life of being the Hiawak, being the Chitapi, learning our stories of origin, living on our landscape. And this is not a land grab, or this is not a land claim, but it's, you know, knowing our identity and experiencing that through our land, through our culture, through our value system, our belief system, our stories of origin. When did those people have time to say those stories? Because, we learn from, we look, we listen, we learn, we act upon those things. And how is it and when is it? Did those children, the over 35,000 children that were taken in the 60s scoop, the over 150,000 children that went to residential school, generation after generation after generation. And if you can see that disconnect and the harm and the violence that it did, and that's why, where and when did we value our lives? Alan Pard said, when we no more treat our lives as being sacred, we will treat ourselves bad. And it starts to normalize that violence, or it starts to normalize that hopelessness and that loss of, the sense of value and identity of who we are as Nehiawa, or who we are as Nititapi. So, when we can account for those things, and that's why I said, when the old people used to ask us, who are you, when we were little kids, and we had to say these things. Well, yeah, that's where it begins, because I know exactly where I am from. I know who my family is, and those are things that give us strength. When we talk about the poverty, that loss of nurturing, that loss of, family and identity, when the nuclear family, it's the nuclear family that holds the traditions, that tells the stories, that passes down names and history, and that sense of belonging, and validates that this, you are our people, and how many people did that not happen for, when we talk about these extortion rates of children going, being lost from our communities. We're the only people in Canada that this is our birthplace, this is our home, this is our land, and yet we're the only race in Canada that's homeless in our own land. How is that? So when we talk about, the intergenerational trauma, and that is grief, because that is something that we have lost, that we don't get back. But when we talk about truth and reconciliation, you can't reconcile something you don't know the truth about. And so reconnecting those gaps and bringing back that, hearing those stories, seeing the land, knowing our relatives, finding our people, and bringing our spirits home. I think, that is what is going to give strength to our children in the future. Because once you have that, you know exactly who you are, exactly where you are going, and exactly where you belong. The rest of those things are secondary. The career development, having the job, and having, but once that spirit is strong, once that person is physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually strong, then it's that culture, it's that value system, it's that belief system that will nurture that person back. And the when I think of, when I hear the statistics, and I remember a long time ago at university, they said, one of the comments I remember hearing was that, statistics is the language of genocide. And I didn't get it at the time, but we can't we can't keep counting the dead and waiting for the dead to arrive, because we did that in tuberculosis. We did that in, even with the 1918 swine flu and the HIV AIDS. And, we can't continue to be the statistics. But the to reverse that, the sacred knowledge, the traditional knowledge, that's what our new statistic needs to work towards, is bringing our people together, bringing our people and allowing, like I've been a facilitator at some workshops where I've met people that are my age and younger, in their 40s, in their 50s, talk about the sadness of being part of the 60s scoop. And it's, I want my language, my culture, my traditions, and I want them now, and you're the one that's going to give them to me. And even though that's a big, huge ask, but understanding that that is a void that people have come with, is that search of that nehiawa needs it to be. In my heart, in my mind, I know that there's something more, there's something more sacred about, being the indigenous person that I say I am. And it's not rushing back to TP days, or, convincing everybody to go to ceremony and, wigwams and do the smudge and all that. It's not about that. It's about our way of life. It's about, our traditions become all the more important for us to carry on. And learning what those traditions are that make us a good life. So when you answer the question, ask the question of, well, then what is a good life? Well, it's knowing our history. It's exactly all of those things, what Adam said, when a child knows culture, language, family, relatives, history, food, landscape, all of those things, he'll know exactly what is expected of him. He'll know exactly what he's responsible for, or what she's responsible for. And, learning those in the rites of passage. And it empowers children. And the first thing we do for children is give them a name. And what is our name, and what does that mean? Because every name has a story. Loa's name is Natui Sokaisin, which is a really powerful sacred name in our ceremonies. And there has to be a story to that. Somebody must have, because the way that we give names to children, to our young people. And because that, then you grow up with that, and knowing, that you are a valued person and you're part of our people. So I think, when we talk about residential school, and I know a lot of people think, well, if I hear another thing, I'm going to throw up, but it's that when we can come to terms with understanding, the goals of residential school and the effects, and that's why it's a legacy, and we're part of that, and understanding that language of what does intergenerational trauma mean, and I hate it, when you hear things like, oh, get over it. Well, you know what? That's a more hurtful and harmful thing to say, because you know getting over, healing is not a prescribed event, or it's a process, and coming to terms with that, and understanding that, and knowing that we have the support of our people in our cultures, in our value system, in our belief system, and finding out, like in Canada, we're what, almost 38 million people or 37 million plus, and we're 2.2 million First Nation, Métis, and Inuit. How many of us speak the 57 languages that are known across our country that are Indigenous languages? You know, and I always tell my students, if Blackfoot people ever stop speaking Blackfoot, who will see it? Who will hear it? Who will learn it? Who will do it? And it's not like a Polish person or a German person can go back to their country and they will see their country, their culture alive and well. But here, if it ever stops, there's no place elsewhere. And I remember one of our elders from the Mohawks saying that it's like dinosaur bones. You can't dig up dinosaur bones and recreate dinosaurs, much less Jurassic Park. But, that's in the movies. When we talk about loss of language and identity, it's critical. But there's enough people alive today that know that have that. And it's that people that are going to bring our children back home so that they'll be healthier adults in the future, that they will know exactly what to do for their, when we talk about who are we as Indigenous people, who are we as First Nation. Well, we do have stories of origin. We do have stories of Wisakechak, we have stories of Napi, we have stories of Gatuyis, we have stories of Scarface. Every tribe has stories, and the stories of the Star People, and the stories of seasonal changes. All of that affects our health and well-being and our continuity as well. Because that's what feeds us, that's what nurtures us, that's what gives us strength.
I want to thank you, and I could listen to you all day. I think I've said that a few times because we've done a few things together. And I want to say, just some of the quotes and some of the things you said, I think it's hard for Canadians to understand that residential schools came from a policy and a law that was made by this Canadian government. And a lot of the quotes that you say, our Prime Minister did say certain things. The Prime Minister of Indian Affairs said certain things. They did this right in the open. It was not something that they closed behind closed doors. They said this right in the House of Commons. Sir John A. Macdonald stated, when the child is on the reserve, the child lives with his parents who are savages. He is surrounded by savages. And though he may learn to read and write, his habits of training and mode of thought are Indian. He is simply a savage who can read and write. Now, that was said right in the House of Commons when the residential school system was being built in 1883. And the other thing is the Public Works Minister, Hector Lavajan, and here in Calgary, we had changed the Lavajan Bridge to the Reconciliation Bridge. And he stated, in order to educate children properly, we must separate them from their families. Some may say that this is hard, but if we want to civilize them, we must do that. So in understanding that, I'm always telling people in a lot of the training that I give is we were very vibrant communities before colonization. We had our own laws, our own health system, our own education system, and those things, worked in harmony, and we worked in harmony with the land. So for over a century, the last residential school closed in 1996 in Saskatchewan, and children were forcibly displaced. They suffered physical, sexual, psychological, spiritual abuse while attending residential schools. And this has had an impact even on the generations today, including the health problems, the substance abuse, the mortality rate of our people, the suicide rates, the criminal activity. Also just in general, the families and communities coming apart, and these things, as Joanne had said earlier, they continue today. You know, there's the 60 scoop in the child welfare system. So in having said that, I want to thank Pam for sharing what she had shared there, and I want to go to Joanne just to actually ask you, and please give any perspective from what Pam has said as well. But since the pandemic in March 2020, there have been many reports of increased substance abuse, in particular, an increase in opioid and poisonings. And can you also share with us what are you seeing firsthand in your treatment center?
Absolutely. So I would say our treatment center, when the pandemic hit, we actually closed, as most of the or almost all the NAIDAP programs did close for a period of time. And we very quickly pivoted to outreach supports and virtual content. So we served clients in very different ways and developed different kinds of programming. So a lot of that, what we've definitely seen, there is some incongruencies in what the mainstream society is experiencing with the opioid crisis, and then how it is affecting our First Nations communities. So in 2016, as an example, in Alberta, given that First Nations people make up, or persons make up 6% of our Alberta's population. In 2016, we had the opioid deaths, we made up 14% of the opioid deaths in 2016. And in 2020, that had increased to 22%. So I'm very mindful as well of Pam's words around statistics or the language of oppressors. Unfortunately, we do when we do create programs, and when we do have to go to government to request programming dollars and to run these programs. So we do have to track these things, and they do tell us a picture of what might be going on. In the north, in our region where Christopher and I both work, we both work on Fort McMurray First Nation 468 in separate departments. But we do see a different picture. I think that the opioid crisis has very much hit the southern part of the province a lot harder, where Elder Pam resides. We do see in our treatment center, I kind of scanned our last applications for the last 9 months for what we've received. So alcohol is still very prominent, and that has continued, and that really hasn't dipped. So clients are identifying alcohol as a main concern, but opioids and methamphetamine are hand in hand. And then in our community as well, for our overdose deaths, in 2021, for the 10 months of 2021, we had 6 identified as opioid deaths specifically. In 2020, that we had a significant amount more deaths, 29 deaths in our region, and that was split between methamphetamine and opioids fairly evenly. So I don't know, Christopher would certainly be able to speak to this as well. We've certainly seen a large percentage of our clients coming forward with concerns around opioids and methamphetamines equally, but certainly our clients from the South, it seems to be more of an impact and more of an epidemic, really. So our heart definitely goes out to those communities. And we've certainly pivoted our services. We're previous to the pandemic, we did not accommodate opioid agonist therapies at our treatment program. We also, and I guess I would also say to, when I speak about colonization is alive and well, and that we live within these systems now as a marginalized people, even our systems are what we have available to us at a federal system versus a provincial system, where provincial treatment centers have detox centers and they have nurses on site and doctors readily available. That's something that hasn't historically been available to us in our federal programs. So within the last few years of the pandemic, we've been able to collaborate more and develop more resources to be able to be more responsive and more linked and collaborate more within the federal system. So that's definitely a positive that has come out of this. So there definitely are incongruencies into what we have available, but I think that we're much more aware of it. We're having more conversations like this and challenging levels of government and decision makers to really look at things differently, and also pushing awareness and education more. And there seems to be a tipping of the scales where, to me, and unfortunately, particularly out of awareness with the unmarked graves being found, that has tipped things where, again, government and decision makers are more open to these conversations and open to learning more. So lots of work to do, absolutely, but I think that things are starting to very slowly shift. So.
Yes, thank you. What is the population on Fort McMurray number 468?
Approximately 350 or so band members, maybe 100 or so non-band members living with our nation members.
Okay, thank you so much, Joanne, for that. And I also want to say, I could not imagine, I've looked at different sectors, and when we went into the pandemic, those forward-facing, front-facing services, instantly were impacted, and there was a lot of worry when it first happened. I was extremely worried and unable to go to my two nations where my mom and dad are from, and staying away from them, and understanding there was major isolation going on and quarantines. So thank you for the hard work that you've done, and let's hope we've seen the worst of the isolation behind us. And everyone had to pivot and do different things and put their minds together. And I'm glad to see that that's happened. At this time, I'll go to Christopher. Christopher, I want to ask you the same thing. Since the pandemic began, we have seen reports increased in substance use, in particular increased in opioid use and poisonings. What have you seen firsthand? And if you also want to add anything to what Elder Pound shared as well.
Yeah, I can kind of share Joanne's sentiment that, although I think there has been an increase in substance use due to the pandemic in general, the opioid use of opioids is lower up here than it would be in other areas. It's specifically because I worked in the inner city of Edmonton for 7 years, and the first few years, we had our deaths of people, some overdose, some were natural, some were from drinking, some from being outside. But the past 3 years was just an onslaught of emails of people that I was hearing that were passing away in large numbers. And that was all due to the toxicity of the drugs that were out there on the streets. So returning back home this past summer, and then kind of, asking questions and learning about some of the history of where substance abuse has been within our community, and I think there has been an increase towards some opioids and meth use, but I think it's limited thus far, and I think part of that is just through providing services and education to individuals, and because we are a smaller community, I think we're able to support the needs of people a lot quicker than some of the larger nations, because you have such a larger population, and so that's, I think, part of why our numbers are low. But also we're semi-isolated up this way as well, and so even to get to the inner city of Fort McMurray, it's a 40-minute drive, and so not everyone who uses has the ability to move around as freely, and so I think that limits some of the use as well. So yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. I do want to share some stats that we received from the province of Alberta. And I do know as well, BC, every province, the number of Indigenous, those that are passing away are quite high. And B stats only include the First Nation stats. And I know in BC and other places, they're also trying to capture other Indigenous as well, because we know these numbers are actually higher. And I was actually pretty shocked to see from January 1st to December 31st, 2020, that the count of overdoses in Calgary was 85, in Edmonton 72, and that made up 65% of the overdoses in the province of Alberta. And then I could see the next number was the Lethbridge area, which would be the Blood Tribe Gunny nations, those that are impacted down there. And I do know that was also something that I was definitely well aware of, especially family being impacted during COVID, because that's where my two families are from, and having the impacts of those instances in the South. When you talk about our isolation and some of the quarantine, and people are still going through different quarantines, and some of the impacts, the vaccines, the already impacts that we're dealing with in general. If I can go to Elder Pam, what do you think are some of the aspects during the pandemic that led to that increase? And also, how could we possibly counteract that now?
Um, some of the, in talking with people that are working in the community, like the opioid crisis, the coordinator, and going to some of their meetings, because the very first time I left the Canadian Red Cross in 2013, the end of 2013, and I did a lot of the disaster response, disaster preparedness, all of these things. One thing that you learn about disaster is, when it's a natural and unnatural disaster. This is an unnatural disaster. Violence will always go up, and addictions will either stay the same or they will go up immediately, like 30 days after the disaster has struck. And we've been in this disaster since 2014. And we started talking about the shock of people doing Oxycontin, and then people snorting, and even to the point of Tylenol, if they couldn't get these drugs. And as long as the community was saying nothing, it was allowing it to continue. And so people within our community, I remember we did marches in town site, and I remember we scheduled 6 weeks. Every Saturday, rain or shine, we were going to show up, and we showed up by the hundreds. And we showed up. There was elders, there were children, there were frontline workers, there were social workers, and we were supported by the police. And this was much smaller at the time. It was not as big a crisis and out of control. We were talking about gang violence. We were talking about, it wasn't even opioids. It was the pills, So the language changed, and economy changed, money changed hands. And I remember being at the Red Cross, and I had helped 2 different couples and out of crisis. And this was out of flood, out of storm. And we had to evacuate them. And in documenting these families at the table, at the end of the day, mom and dad, first mom and dad had 7 children. Second mom and dad had 5 children and were expecting twins. Later I found out that twin girls were born. And so they had 7 children. That was a long time ago. And by 2017, both parents had died, both sets of parents, both from opioid overdose. And, that's 14 children that are homeless, that are orphan in a heartbeat, because there's no more mom, no more dad, no more Santa Claus, no more Tooth Fairy, no more Christmas concert, no more birthday. And so, the human cost, that's what we were talking about, these children. And, we can't replace those parents, but we can talk to the parents and say, what is it that we expect? We want you to be good parents. We want you to be good members in our community. And we want you to be good to yourself. So it was that encouraging not to do the drugs, not because, what we find out from Dr. Cheryl was that in the fentanyl, especially, and medically, like my sisters were nurses, and one of them had said, fentanyl is an end of life drug, but the butcher chemists that were coming to sell drugs here on the reserve, and where the location of our reserve is, it's almost like a gateway community, because we're en route to the US, 15 minutes away. We're 2 hours away from the north into Calgary, and we're an hour away to British Columbia. And so, it was, and then we started to find out more and more things about our community, like the use of drones to deliver drugs. I mean, who does that? But that was already happening in 2020, in 2019. And it was almost like we had to put up the barricades. You have to put up the barricades, to the show of force that it's not allowed to happen here anymore. Because you know what? At the end of the day, we are counting the dead parents, over 100 last year, and the year before, and the year before, and the year before. And if we never say anything, if we never do anything, and actually, and we asked our coordinator to train us as elders. I mean, if I have naloxone kits, I had to practice to know how to use it, and also uh, to visit with the lived experience coaches. And these are survivors, actual survivors of the opioid crisis themselves. And they're still in recovery. And how are they helping other people to recover? How are they supporting people that are still using? And so that hopefully at the end of the day, maybe one Melissa can affect the change of 5-10 people on the street, because those 5-10 people have families, because it's people, like when we talk about the effect that it has on our community, yeah, the human and social cost is to the children and to the future. And so we have to find out more about the science and the economics, and curb that, so that what can we do to help and how can we help? That it's and some of it as an elder and you know, this is shouldn't even be said on record, but you know, offering people the possibility of ceremony and of prayer, of strength, you know, and that helped too. And you know, the depression, the recovery, and the counseling and the suicide, all of those things are really big things, especially for children to deal with. And what are we as the grown-ups or the adults or the elders in the community, how are we helping so that children have a better life, you know? And that opioids is the enemy. The war is with opioids.
I want to say thank you for sharing, you know, everything you just said, and it's brought a lot of different perspective into the way I'm thinking about this. But I also did want to share some stats. You talked about 2015, and in 2015 across Canada there was a major increase in spike. And in 2016, when I think of Alberta here, I'm looking at the stats, the count was 72. In 2020, it went to 240. In BC as well, just from 2019 to 2020, their results were just released not long ago, and it was up 93%. So not only are we having our communities impacted by COVID, you know, because we've had many deaths to COVID, we've had this major increase, you know, most likely well over 100% when you count from the time of the pandemic to now. And I look at that and I really don't know if people, and that's why I feel this show is very important in understanding and putting into perspective how much we're actually dealing with. You know, Joanne, I want to go to you and I want to ask you, what do you see as some of the things that are working? You know, I know Elder Pam had talked about spirituality, culture, those types of things. Those have always been a major success with us. Can you talk about possibly even some of the impacts you've seen different in the pandemic, as well as some of the solutions?
So I really echo what Elder Pam has said. And I think that, again, in the last few years, we've really recognized, and there has been more awareness around this. So I think it is, as an administrator, and particularly working within the homelessness sector as well, it's primarily a non-Indigenous system and non-Indigenous funders that I'm working with. So one of the things that I often find myself saying is that I don't know that I've ever encountered an Indigenous person, not myself, not someone within my family, and not within my client base, that has ever said that they're negative, that you know, they were ever in a really hard place in life, and that it was counseling or you know, like treatment alone that actually helped them change their life. It's always culture. It's always about reconnecting back to who we are, understanding those who our ancestors are, and then stepping onto the red road, or starting to partake in culture. And I know for me too, I come from a family of addiction, and experienced quite a bit. And I think that I very easily could have been a statistic back in the early 90s when I was really struggling. And it was a family, through word of mouth, it was a family from Siksika that had heard about me struggling and had opened their home to me for me to go stay with them for a weekend. And they absolutely, that family that you know, I'm not even connected to now, but they changed my life. And you know, they took me to ceremony that weekend and totally set me on a different path, where my sister has never had that intervention. My sister is lost in her addiction. So I'm a very big proponent of culture, and culture has to be the starting point. It isn't an afterthought. It has to be a starting point for all of our days, for all of our content, and then we bring in that clinical aspect. It isn't the clinical aspect first, it's culture first. So the pandemic has allowed us the ability to network virtually. I'll give you an example, and Christopher will know what I'm speaking about, but we've always wanted to have more content, more just different access to things. So I'll give you an example of hide tanning. I've always wanted to have a hide tanning workshop at the treatment center. And, and again, I've been there for years. And then lo and behold, there's a hide tanner that's gone absolutely viral, and it's all over Facebook and it's all over Instagram. And he's got, 40 hides tanning, and this is about a year and a half ago. And I start to look at who this is. He's a mile away from us and had been all along. We didn't know. We really didn't know. So there, having different drummers and dancers come to present to our clients, and now, really beautiful, wonderful elders to be able to come and speak with our clients virtually that we just did not have access to before. So that's the one silver lining that I can say that has come out of the pandemic, is a lot more collaboration, a lot more working together and awareness. Yeah, I'm not sure if I answered your question, but.
Oh, no, you did, definitely. I really thank you. And I want to say as well, what came to my mind is there definitely is, and I've heard this from elders and growing up, that there's a power beyond us when we connect to that. And once the connection is made, that's a bond that cannot be broken, but the bond was always there. So I wanna say that as you were saying the words you were saying about spirituality, that came to my mind. So thank you for that. Christopher, I want to go to you as well to find out, one, what do you think is working and what successes do you see? It's hard to say success, but what are the things that you see that are working? And as well, if there's anything that you can bring from the current pandemic, in the sense of what did you see layered on top of the issue that's already there?
Yeah, absolutely. So some of the things that have been working, I think Joanne highlighted it, but some of the ability to reach people through different avenues other than directly in person. So Zoom has taught us a lot about being able to connect with folk. And primarily it's really been effective for our off-nation members who live in cities or other jurisdictions who don't have access to come out here. We've been able to connect with them and they become way more comfortable with our staff and with our nation, because they've been able to jump in on things that we've been doing. And so that always is a good thing to build that community capacity up. But on the nation in of itself, it has been very difficult for a lot of folk, because we were adhering to the policies in place around restrictions of gatherings, et cetera. And some of the folk who we wanted to really be part of these programs, there was barriers in place for them. And so we were grateful that there was opportunities out there through different grants and whatnot to be able to assist people with their internet connection, to be able to assist people with Chromebooks so that they were able to attend these online virtual meetings as well. When outside of COVID, that might have been definitely a barrier for them. And then so having those things available for us has really helped. And again, partnering with other agencies and other nations and other elders to be able to share some of those gifts and talents that we have. And then, like Joanne mentioned too, we have a wealth of knowledge within our nation that, prior to COVID, everyone was going their own direction, doing their own thing. And so not too much was shared amongst each other. And then when we were kind of, the doors were closed up on the nation and you needed to, your treaty card to get in, people started talking more amongst themselves. And so we were able to kind of really generate a discussion about what knowledge do we have in our nation that we can share amongst ourselves to get the youth interested in living off the land and understanding ceremony and understanding rites of passage, so we can prep them for that stuff and make sure we keep that within our nation. And so, but again, I think it has been a struggle for a lot of folk who just didn't feel comfortable in Zoom, didn't feel comfortable online, had trouble, reaching out throughout this pandemic. And so that's why I think some of the numbers in addictions has gone up, is just because folk, have been sheltered. And, that, again, poverty, if someone's, lost work because of this, it makes it really difficult for them to, when you're stuck at home for a year, especially if you have anxiety or other issues that you're working on, to come out of that again and jump back into the norm. So some people just, have decided to use substances to help get through those periods of time, right? But now we're challenging folks again. We're kind of, we partnered with Joanne in the Mark Gaming Treatment Center last week and a week and a half ago, and we had a round dance. So it was the first kind of big event that we were able to host in our tree area over pretty much the past 2 years. And the number of smiling faces and children and parents and elders that came out to support that ceremony was beautiful. And really for us, it's an eye opener as to what's to come for us, because again, COVID has been very difficult on a lot of folk, but now is an opportunity for us to rekindle those connections with each other, but also to grow on them, because some people that you never talked to at the band office or at a function, you never talked to them then, but now you've seen them on Zoom, for their face on Zoom for the last year and a half. So maybe those connections are a little easier to have those conversations with them. And so that's kind of where we're at now, is how we're starting to exit this pandemic, and how do we how do we take advantage of this opportunity to really engage community, so that community can support itself, right? We just need to create that safe space for that, right? And so that's what we're excited and slowly getting to.
I would also add that there are things that have happened that we aren't necessarily even a part of. There's been some really strong women's circles that have developed, some beading circles, and they have organically now kind of developed as a strong voice in our community, and we support and we dance in those same circles as well. So we don't take credit for that, but that's something that has really happened within our community that we've been able to see. And then we have also developed a lot of virtual, we have 5 different virtual support groups that run 5 evenings a week through our program for aftercare and things like that. And they're open to anybody within really. We have people from the States that dial into those groups. And those are working really, really well, and we'll continue to keep on as well with our residential programming, with our in-person programming. We'll continue to still develop those virtual programs more and more and more. And we hope to be able to launch our virtual treatment program again. We've had a couple rotations of that. So those things are things that we did not think were possible at all. I never at all thought that you could teach something like rattles, we'll put it that way, to do rattle teachings or skirt making or anything like that online. But we've learned that you can. And just like Christopher is saying, where the opportunities to connect some of the band members that live outside of the community or outside of the province are now much more connected to their community. We're now able to reach individuals, families, moms. We have moms attending treatment now with babies on their hips. We have couples. There's no couples treatment, and there hasn't been for a long time. So we have couples going through treatment through virtual treatment together, and then seeing them in person when we start we did our culture camp last year, and we had a couple that attended that was a part of our virtual program. So there's just it's really strengthening networks and really capitalizing on the technology that's out there that we were maybe a bit scared of, that we were forced to learn from the pandemic.
Thank you very much for sharing that. I was actually going to say that exact thing at the end there when you said when the Zoom came on, MS Teams and others for my work, I think it took 1 week. I actually took that first 1 week to not attend nothing. I was not somebody that wanted to accept it. And I think of a lot of our people were that way. And then I thought, okay, this is where society is going. This is where I need to go, and I will accept this. And it took a long time to get used to. I never assumed that something like a treatment care, I do know medical, I had doctor's appointments that were even online, and that was very annoying. But I have noticed that a lot of those remote communities, they're able to do doctor care remotely now as well. And even to see therapists and different types of things that as well as also coming remotely. So thank you for that. And I'm really, really thankful to see that there's actually hope coming out of this new technology that we were definitely first fearful of, did not have. I was upset that our First Nations people, we had children that were going to online school, many children in the home, not even one device to go to school with. Those types of things and challenges that we've had. So thank you for assisting in that pivot and doing that. I do want to ask, and I'll go to Elder Pam. We'll go around, and if you can maybe do 2 or 3 minutes with this, and then I want to also go around and do closing remarks from those. When we do go off the air, I would like to also ask Pam to send us off with a prayer. I want to ask many of us. There's not one Indigenous person that I know that does not have a family member that is struggling, currently passed or has passed on. When you're struggling, and how, as a person that is well, how do you support somebody that is either a friend of yours, that is one of your loved ones, and they're struggling with addiction? What can we do today, or even to our listeners? What is it that could be done to assist someone? So I'll go to Elder Pam.
For me personally, um, I I had somebody crash into my house, physically crash into my house. Like, she was pounding on the door, and it was cold outside. It was raining, um, and I let her sit on my chair, and she had to calm down. So I just let her breathe. But I did the first thing that came to mind was just for her to do a smudge with me. And I let her know that I cared. I let her know, she's my niece. She's just a little person. And yeah, she was struggling and she was afraid. I don't know what that is like. I can't know what, you know, and just seeing her, listening to her, and that was the first thing that came to mind. And we learned that in training, just to sit and listen, encourage and support, and tell them that we care. We never make promises we cannot keep or that we shouldn't keep. We only offer our support in caring and ask them, what can I do to help you? And we only do what we physically are capable of doing to help them. And that's why because a lot of times as counselors or elders or aunties, or sometimes you are the last person they come to. And we show them that we care. We show them that we do love them and that we value them. And because it's the same thing what Alan Park said: when we no more think our life is sacred, we don't value ourselves and we treat ourselves back. So to me, that's an important, it's not just a physical gesture, but it's from the heart.
Mhm. Mhm.
That we
Thank
show
you.
people we care.
Thank you very much. I'll go to Christopher. And again, it's how could we support our loved ones who are going through struggles?
Yeah, and I typically just utilize the same kind of thing that I've used while working in the inner city. And I come from a background of harm reduction. So for the most part, it's just trying to meet someone where they're at that time. And so I've had family members come to me in crisis modes, or they're on that pivot of wanting to change where they're going. So for me, it's just listening and trying to support them with where they're at in that moment. And then if because I do have some experience in how some of these systems work, if they're at that stage where they want to change, then I try to support them through those networks, because it can be very overwhelming for even just a regular person, let alone when you're experiencing withdrawals and anxiety and depression and everything else that comes with detoxifying. Having someone stand in your corner to help direct you and hold your hand and listen can go a very, very long way. And so that's pretty much where what I do is just try to listen. Don't be judgmental. And then, just meet them where they're at without putting expectations on them.
Thank you. Thanks, Christopher. Joanne?
I actually really just echo a lot of what Elder Pam and Christopher said. With the persons that I'm dealing with my family members, it is a lot of really not judging. I think that coming from a place of understanding or the belief that addiction is born out of trauma, it removes much of that idea that they're doing something wrong. And also understanding too that with addiction at a certain point, choice is not a part of it. There gets to be a point where there is a tipping point, and choice is not really a part of it anymore. So it's learning, I think that, or learning and listening and sitting with them, spending time with them, giving them a bit of a reprieve of normalcy. And I think Christopher probably gets this quite a bit too, but like people seek us out because we know that we can help, and I help them to navigate, really understand. And I do this with our clients very much as well. What are your belief systems and how old are you, and that, like, understanding where they're coming from so that you can send them in the best direction and steer them the same way, and just to help them remove that fear, because it takes a lot of courage to come out and actually ask for help. So sometimes I would say that my best days at work are when I happen to pick up the phone and it's a grandma or a mom that just needs to talk about helping their kids, and just helping them to understand navigating that system. And if I was in your shoes, this is who I would call, this is where I would go, and call them, and then let me know tomorrow. And just even them being heard, and just validating what they're going through, because it's really difficult. So yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Many thanks to our panelists for joining our discussion today. It has been very insightful and has provided a perspective on how our communities have been dealing with as well substance use and mental health during these difficult times. We're getting to a close of our time. We have a couple of minutes left, and I just want to go around and maybe in 30 seconds, if you could just wrap up and say goodbye to our listeners that are out there, and then off the air we'll do a prayer. So I'll go to Elder Pam. 30 seconds.
30 seconds as if, and the clock starts now. No, I think for me, I'm so grateful that people like Joanne and Christopher, that kind of program mentality exists where culture belongs and is part of recovery. Because when we talk about healing, like I said before, it's not prescribed, it's not an event, but it's a process, and it's taking our lives back. And I think as long as we're of the mindset that our values need to be, or nehiawak, that I see that our miukmat soon, our life is good, and that that life is stronger than opioids, and that there is hope for recovery, and that there is support in our cultures, in our values, in our beliefs, that we can achieve recovery.
Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate your voice today, Elder Pam. I will go to Christopher.
Yes, thank you, Elder Pam, and I appreciate everyone's feedback today and just having this conversation. And I just want to echo what Pam said. I mean, I just celebrated 16 years without alcohol a couple of days ago, and grew up, there was no belief that I'd ever be able to be sober in my life. But so I know it's possible, and I thank Creator, and I thank the elders who guided me along that journey. And so that's my, I extend that out to my relatives, that, you know, the circle is always welcoming to you, no matter where you are at in life. And that, you know, we're here to stand with you and walk that journey. So, hey.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Joanne?
Thank you for the invite today. Thank you again for Elder Pam and Christopher for being here with me today. I just want to say to everybody out there that if you do want support virtually, we follow us on Facebook. Search Mark Amy Treatment Center. It's Wood Buffalo Wellness Society, Mark Amy Treatment Center. We have a number of virtual support groups. Wellbriety is there for everybody. It's not just people in recovery. It also very much helps people who are dealing with family members in addiction. We have our post treatment support group with Smart Recovery as well. It's for anybody leaving treatment or struggling. And then we have our women's support groups that run 2 times a week as well. And we do just a number of different things. So search us out, and hopefully we can connect you with some supports, and we're here.